Most people dream of escaping to their lake cabin for peace. But when Mark arrived earlier than planned, his quiet retreat turned into a nightmare. Instead of calm water and fresh mountain air, he saw lights flickering inside his cabin, lights he hadn't left on. His heart sank. Someone was inside. And that was just the beginning. Mark had owned this lakefront cabin for years, a place filled with memories of fishing trips with his dad and summers with friends. The cabin wasn't fancy, but it was his sanctuary. That's why his stomach twisted when he noticed smoke rising from the chimney. He hadn't been there in weeks. Cautiously, he stepped closer, and that's when a voice snapped at him from the porch. "Can I help you?" A woman, mid-40s, dressed in clothes far too casual for a visitor, stood with a mug in her hand. She looked comfortable, too comfortable. Mark's pulse quickened. "This is my property," he said firmly. But before the woman could reply, headlights swung across the driveway. It was Karen, the HOA president, striding toward him with her arms crossed. "We've had complaints about trespassers," she declared, her voice sharp as glass. "You shouldn't be here." Mark blinked in disbelief. "I own this cabin." "Who is this woman?" Karen smirked. "She's my friend, and she's staying here under HOA protection until things are resolved." The word resolved chilled Mark. What was going on? Why was his own property being treated as if it belonged to someone else? And why was Karen acting like she held the keys to his future? He hadn't even stepped inside yet, and already the battle lines were drawn. Mark stood frozen, his keys still clutched in his hand. The woman in his cabin leaned against the porch rail, as if daring him to argue. Karen's smirk deepened when she noticed his silence. "You'll need to leave, Mark," she said, her voice dripping with authority. "The HOA voted to use this cabin as temporary housing for community matters. My friend is staying here legally." "Legally?" Mark snapped. "This cabin isn't even part of the HOA. It's private property." Karen raised an eyebrow. "Not anymore. The board agreed that cabins around the lake fall under our jurisdiction. It's in the new bylaws." Mark's stomach turned. He had never signed any new documents. This was his land, bought long before the HOA had even existed. But as he looked at the woman sipping coffee on his porch, he realized Karen wasn't just bending rules, she was rewriting them. "I'm calling the cops," Mark declared, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. Karen laughed. "Go ahead. They already know about you." Minutes later, flashing lights reflected off the lake. Two officers stepped out, looking from Karen to Mark. "We got a report of a trespasser," one of them said. Mark's jaw tightened. "I'm not trespassing. I live here. I own this cabin." He pulled out the deed he always carried in his truck for property disputes. "Here's the proof." Karen's expression faltered, but only for a second. "Don't be fooled," she told the officers. "He's unstable. We had to step in for safety reasons." The officers exchanged a glance. Mark's heart pounded. Would the truth win, or had Karen already spun her web too tight? The officers inspected the deed, their flashlights cutting across the paper. One officer frowned. "This looks valid," he muttered. But Karen wasn't ready to give up. "Of course it looks valid," she hissed. "But ask yourself, why would the HOA place someone here if there wasn't a problem? He's hiding something." The woman on the porch chimed in. "He stormed up here and scared me. I was just following Karen's instructions." Mark clenched his fists. He had never felt so outnumbered on his own land. "Listen," he said firmly, trying to keep his voice calm, "this cabin is mine. The land is mine. The HOA has no authority here. I can prove it with county records." The officers nodded slowly. "We'll need to verify that," one said. "For now, let's keep things civil." Karen's eyes narrowed. Civil was the last thing she wanted. "Mark," she said sweetly, "if you just cooperate, this could all go away. Let her stay a while. Think of it as community spirit." "Community spirit?" Mark echoed. "That's theft." The officers stepped between them. All right, everyone calm down. But inside, Mark was anything but calm. If Karen thought she could rewrite the rules, what else had she taken? What other neighbors had been silenced? And why was she so desperate to keep her friend in his cabin? As the night deepened, one truth became clear: Karen was hiding more than just a squatter. And Mark was determined to find out what it was. The following morning, Mark drove straight to the county office. He spent hours combing through property records, deeds, and survey maps. And there it was, undeniable proof. His cabin and the surrounding land were purchased years before the HOA even existed. The lines were clear. His property stood outside their jurisdiction. Armed with copies of the documents, Mark returned to the lake. He wasn't just angry now, he was ready for battle. As he pulled into his driveway, Karen was already waiting, her arms folded, her friend lounging on the porch like she owned the place. "Back so soon?" Karen said with a mocking smile. Mark held up the papers. "This proves you've overstepped. The HOA has no rights here." For the first time, Karen's face flickered with uncertainty. But she quickly masked it. "Paperwork can be faked. My friend isn't going anywhere." The audacity made Mark's blood boil. "Then she's trespassing," he said firmly. "And this time, I'm the one calling the cops." Karen's confidence wavered, but her friend looked nervous. Still, Karen pressed on. "Call them. We'll see whose side they take when they hear the full story." Something about her tone unsettled Mark. What full story was she preparing to spin? He realized Karen's power didn't come from truth, it came from manipulation. As he dialed the sheriff's office, Karen leaned closer, whispering so only he could hear, "You think you're smart. But this lake hides secrets. And when they surface, you'll wish you had walked away." Mark didn't know what she meant, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to be bullied off his own land. The deputies arrived that afternoon, their cars crunching over the gravel driveway. Unlike before, Mark greeted them with calm confidence. "This is my land," he said, handing over the official documents. "These records prove the HOA has no jurisdiction here. That woman is trespassing." The deputies studied the paperwork carefully. One of them finally nodded. "Looks legitimate to me." Karen's face turned crimson. "You can't trust him. He's twisting things." "The HOA, ma'am," the deputy interrupted, "the HOA doesn't override county property rights. If this deed is accurate, you and your guest may be in violation." For the first time, Karen stumbled over her words. But before she could recover, Mark stepped forward. "I want her removed. Now." The deputies turned toward the porch. The woman, Karen's friend, looked frightened. "Karen, I don't want trouble," she whispered. "Maybe I should go." "No." Karen snapped. "Stay right where you are." Mark watched closely, his suspicion deepening. Why was Karen so desperate to keep her friend in the cabin? What was she hiding? The deputies finally spoke. "We'll give you both 24 hours to sort this legally. If this deed checks out, the squatter has to leave." Karen shot Mark a glare sharp enough to cut glass. "You'll regret this," she spat. As the deputies drove away, Mark's cabin stood caught in a storm he hadn't asked for. But the look in Karen's eyes told him this fight was far from over, and deep down, he knew whatever Karen was hiding wasn't just about a squatter. It was bigger. Much bigger. That night, Mark barely slept. The cabin, his safe place, felt heavy with unease. He kept replaying Karen's words, "This lake hides secrets." What secrets? And why did she want her friend here so badly? By morning, curiosity pushed him to search. He walked the perimeter of his land, scanning for anything unusual. That's when he noticed it: fresh tire tracks near the back of his property, leading to a hidden path toward the water. He followed them, his pulse quickening, until he found a small shed tucked between the trees. Inside, Mark uncovered something shocking: boxes of HOA documents, financial records, even eviction notices. But why were they hidden on his property? Before he could process, footsteps crunched behind him. It was Karen. Her face twisted with fury. You weren't supposed to find this, she hissed. Mark held up a stack of papers. So this is what it's about? You've been stashing HOA files on my land? Why? Karen's eyes blazed. Because if anyone knew what's in there, the HOA would collapse. My friend is here to keep watch. To make sure no one touches it. Mark's chest tightened. She wasn't just abusing power, she was hiding corruption. You've crossed the line, Karen. This ends now. Karen stepped closer, lowering her voice. If you expose me, I'll drag you down with me. Think carefully, Mark. But Mark was already thinking carefully. And the evidence in his hands was the key to unraveling everything. The following morning, Mark walked into the county courthouse with the boxes of hidden records. He handed them over to investigators, explaining everything: Karen's squatter scheme, the illegal files, the misuse of HOA power. Within hours, the truth was spreading like wildfire. By evening, deputies returned to the lake. This time, they weren't questioning Mark, they were questioning Karen. Neighbors gathered as the sheriff read out the charges: abuse of authority, falsifying HOA documents, and trespassing. Karen's friend packed up quickly, tears in her eyes. She muttered an apology to Mark before leaving. But Karen herself fought to the end, shouting about conspiracies and betrayal. Yet her voice cracked when the deputies finally led her away. Mark stood on his porch, the lake calm again, watching the scene unfold. For the first time in weeks, he felt peace returning to his cabin. His sanctuary was his again. The neighbors approached, many of them thanking him. We were too scared to stand up to her, one admitted. But you did. You saved us all. Mark smiled faintly. He hadn't set out to be a hero, he just wanted to protect what was his. But in the process, he had exposed a truth that freed the entire community. The lake shimmered in the sunset, no longer shadowed by secrets. And though the battle had been fierce, Mark knew one thing for certain: the cabin. The land, the memories, they were finally safe, and that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you loved the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.